Love, betrayal, and murder, three words that could expose the perfect image of a devoted Christian wife, a respected judge, and a charismatic teacher. But, beneath the surface of San Francisco's bustling streets, a deadly secret brewed between them. How far can obsession and forbidden love push someone before everything unravels in a single violent act? San Francisco, with its hills and fog-draped mornings, is a city that thrives on contrasts. Its charm lies in its diversity, its culture, and the lives it cradles within its sprawling neighborhoods. Among the many residents living in this vibrant city, Judge Aaron Whitaker was an embodiment of prestige and power. Known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering sense of justice, his reputation preceded him in the courtroom. But beneath the accolades and polished veneer lay a man caught in the throes of an obsession he could neither explain nor control. Aaron lived in a Victorian home in Pacific Heights with his wife, Eleanor, a devout Christian woman who radiated a quiet strength. Her faith was her cornerstone, the foundation upon which she built her life. To the outside world, the Whitakers seemed perfect. Aaron's booming career as a judge, Eleanor's active role in their church, and their picture-perfect family gatherings suggested harmony. Yet, in truth, their marriage had become an empty shell, devoid of intimacy and trust. It began subtly, as most shifts in relationships do. Eleanor's focus on church activities intensified, and Aaron often felt like a spectator in his own home. She volunteered for the soup kitchen, led prayer groups, and immersed herself in her Bible study sessions. At first, Aaron admired her devotion, but over time, he began to resent the hours she spent away, feeling the sting of neglect, as she prioritized her faith over their marriage. Eleanor, however, found solace in her church community. It was there that she met Tariq Hamid, a high school history teacher who had recently joined the congregation. Tariq, a soft-spoken and intelligent man, was an anomaly in their circle. A Muslim in a predominantly Christian group, his presence raised eyebrows but also stirred curiosity. Tariq explained that he was there to foster interfaith dialogue and share perspectives, a mission that resonated with Eleanor's deeply spiritual nature. The connection between Eleanor and Tariq was instant, though it was unspoken at first. They shared conversations about faith, humanity, and the struggles of navigating a world that seemed increasingly divided. Tariq's gentle demeanor and thought-provoking insights filled a void Eleanor hadn't realized existed. Aaron, preoccupied with his career, dismissed Eleanor's growing enthusiasm for her interfaith activities as yet another church commitment. The Whitakers' marriage continued its quiet descent. Aaron became more irritable at home, masking his frustration with workaholism. Eleanor, in turn, grew more distant, burying herself in the emotional support she found in Tariq. Their friendship deepened, evolving into something that defied the boundaries of Eleanor's faith and morality. She was torn between her devotion to her religion and the undeniable pull she felt toward Tariq. By the time Aaron noticed Eleanor's late-night phone calls and her increasingly secretive behavior, it was too late. His suspicions grew, and he began to watch her closely, piecing together the fragments of her betrayal. Aaron's mounting jealousy consumed him. He became paranoid, obsessing over the possibility that his wife was having an affair. Eleanor, sensing his scrutiny, became even more careful, though guilt gnawed at her conscience. In late October 2024, Aaron's fears were confirmed. Eleanor had left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter one evening while she was upstairs. Aaron, fueled by curiosity and dread, scrolled through her messages. The text exchange with Tariq left no room for interpretation. The words were intimate, layered with emotions Aaron hadn't seen from Eleanor in years. A wave of anger surged through him. And in that moment, the lines between his professional and personal life began to blur. Aaron's obsession took a darker turn. He tracked Eleanor's movements, noted her absences, and even hired a private investigator. What he discovered added fuel to his fire. Eleanor and Tariq met regularly at a cafe near Tariq's school. They shared meals, laughter, and what Aaron interpreted as stolen moments. The thought of his wife finding joy with another man was unbearable. By mid-November, Aaron was unraveling. His work suffered as he struggled to maintain his composure. In the courtroom, his usual decisiveness was replaced with irritability. Colleagues noticed the change, but Aaron dismissed their concerns. Inside, he was consumed by the humiliation of Eleanor's betrayal and the audacity of Tariq's involvement. Eleanor, unaware of the extent of Aaron's discovery, continued her secret relationship with Tariq. It wasn't purely physical, though the tension between them was undeniable. For her, Tariq represented everything she longed for: kindness, attention, and understanding. For Tariq, Eleanor was a light in his often lonely world. He admired her strength, even as he questioned the morality of their connection. But Aaron's silence was a storm waiting to break. His anger festered, morphing into a dangerous resolve. By late November, he was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was a man who saw his wife's affair as a direct assault on his pride, his authority, and his identity. And for Aaron, there was only one way to regain control. On the surface, life continued as normal for the Whitakers. Thanksgiving came and went, with family members gathering around their dining table, unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath. Eleanor forced a smile as she served dinner, while Aaron seethed silently, plotting his next move. Tariq, meanwhile, celebrated the holiday alone, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their relationship could never be public. As December approached, San Francisco's festive lights adorned the city. But for the Whitakers, there was no joy in the air. Aaron had reached his breaking point. He couldn't bear the thought of Eleanor and Tariq together, and the image of their shared moments played over and over in his mind. The night of December 8, 2024 would mark the beginning of the end. Aaron, unable to contain his rage, decided to confront Eleanor, but he knew that a confrontation alone wouldn't be enough to satisfy the storm inside him. This was a man who had spent years passing judgment on others, ensuring that justice was served. Now, he would play both judge and executioner. The evening of December 8, 2024, began unremarkably for Eleanor. She had attended a church meeting earlier in the day and returned home to prepare dinner. Her routine was mundane, yet comforting, a familiar rhythm she relied on to mask the inner turmoil of her emotions. She had convinced herself that her connection with Tariq was harmless, even as guilt crept in during quiet moments. For Eleanor, the affair wasn't an act of defiance, but a response to years of neglect, a desperate grasp for the love and attention she felt was missing in her marriage. Aaron, however, had spent the entire day brooding. Sitting in his study, surrounded by the weight of his law books and framed degrees, he sifted through the memories of his once happy marriage. He replayed the years when he and Eleanor were deeply in love, wondering how it had all unraveled. But beneath those reflections was a simmering fury. The evidence of her betrayal was irrefutable, and the humiliation of being replaced by Tariq, a man Aaron saw as an outsider, both in faith and culture, felt unbearable. That evening, Aaron's demeanor was unusually calm, masking the storm within. As Eleanor prepared dinner, he watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. She attempted small talk, mentioning plans for a Christmas charity event at the church, but Aaron barely responded. She interpreted his silence as another symptom of their strained relationship and didn't press further. Aaron's plan was meticulous, calculated to the finest detail. He had spent days researching Tariq's routine, memorizing his movements. He knew Tariq often stayed late at the school to prepare lesson plans and grade assignments. The isolation of the school building, coupled with the quiet of the late hours, made it the perfect setting for what Aaron had in mind. By 9 p.m., Aaron announced that he needed to step out to handle some urgent paperwork. Eleanor barely looked up from her book, used to his late-night work habits. She nodded, wishing him a safe drive, and returned to the comforting distraction of her reading. Aaron's heart raced as he left the house, his mind consumed by a singular purpose. He drove through the city, the festive lights of San Francisco casting a deceptive warmth over the cold December night. Aaron's thoughts were laser-focused, and his breathing grew steady as he neared the school where Tariq worked. He parked his car a block away to avoid drawing attention and walked the rest of the way, his footsteps crunching soft. Tariq was seated in his classroom, grading papers by the glow of a desk lamp. The building was silent, save for the faint hum of the heating system. Tariq's focus was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching the room. He glanced up as Aaron stepped into the doorway, his tall frame filling the entrance. Aaron had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but the reality was far more chaotic. The sight of Tariq, the man who had stolen his wife's affections, ignited a rage Aaron could barely contain. Without hesitation, he lunged toward Tariq, his fists clenched and his voice trembling with anger. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Aaron's accusations rang out in the empty classroom, each word laced with venom. Tariq, stunned and confused, attempted to reason with Aaron, but his words only seemed to fuel the judge's fury. In a blind rage, Aaron grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and struck Tariq across the head. The blow sent him crashing to the floor, blood pooling beneath him as his body lay motionless. Aaron stood over Tariq, his chest heaving as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The man who had come to symbolize his humiliation and heartbreak now lay lifeless at his feet. But instead of regret, Aaron felt an unsettling sense of vindication. To him, this was justice, a punishment for the betrayal that had shattered his life. He quickly composed himself, wiping his fingerprints from the paperweight and scanning the room for anything that might tie him to the crime. He left the school as quietly as he had entered, the cold night air biting against his skin. Back at home, Eleanor was still awake, waiting for Aaron's return. When he walked through the door, she noticed a shift in his demeanor. He was calm, almost too calm, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. She asked if everything was all right, and he simply nodded, offering her a faint smile before retreating to the bedroom. The next morning, the news broke. Tariq's body had been discovered by the school janitor, who immediately called the police. The community was in shock, mourning the loss of a beloved teacher whose kindness and intellect had touched so many lives. Eleanor was devastated, her grief compounded by the guilt she carried over their secret relation. Aaron watched her carefully, studying every expression, every tear. He didn't feel remorse for what he had done. In his mind, he had restored order to his world, reclaiming the power he believed had been taken from him. But as the days passed, the weight of his actions began to manifest in other ways. He became paranoid, second-guessing every move, every word. The investigation into Tariq's death was swift and thorough. Detectives combed through his personal life, interviewing colleagues, friends, and family. Eleanor's name inevitably came up, her frequent meetings with Tariq raising questions. When the police arrived at the Whitaker home to speak with her, Aaron felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Eleanor was cooperative, answering their questions with as much composure as she could muster. But her demeanor didn't escape Aaron's notice. She was nervous, her hands trembling as she spoke. For the first time, he saw her as a potential liability, someone who could expose the truth if pushed too far. The investigation dragged on, with no clear leads or suspects. Aaron's paranoia deepened, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. He struggled to maintain his composure in court, his once pristine reputation now overshadowed by whispers of his temper and unpredictability. Eleanor, meanwhile, was drowning in her own guilt. She suspected Aaron knew about her affair but couldn't bring herself to confront him. The tension between them was unbearable, their once loveless marriage now a battleground of unspoken truths and simmering resentment. As Christmas approached, the festive cheer of San Francisco seemed like a cruel joke to the Whitakers. Their home, once filled with holiday decorations and warmth, now felt cold and lifeless. The murder of Tariq Hamid had shattered whatever illusions they had left about their marriage, leaving behind a trail of secrets, lies, and blood. The police investigation into Tariq's murder intensified as days turned into weeks. The initial shock within the San Francisco community gave way to a thirst for justice, and the media began to highlight the mysterious circumstances of his death. Reporters camped outside the school and near Tariq's family home, broadcasting stories of a promising young teacher whose life had been cruelly cut short. His colleagues and students held vigils, remembering him as a kind-hearted man who went out of his way to help others. But the narrative was incomplete, and the gaps left the public hungry for answers. Meanwhile, Aaron's grip on his own reality began to falter. He had always prided himself on his ability to maintain composure under pressure, a trait that had served him well in his role as a judge. However, this time was different. The crime he had committed was no mere legal matter he could study and adjudicate. This was personal, and it came with consequences he hadn't fully anticipated. Every knock at the door, every glance from a neighbor, every ring of the phone felt like a potential threat. Aaron would sit in his study late into the night, staring at the faint bloodstain on the paperweight he had kept as a twisted reminder of his act. He told himself he had done the right thing, that Tariq's death was justified, but deep down, the weight of his guilt was suffocating. Eleanor's grief was becoming harder to conceal. She rarely left the house except to attend church services, and even there her presence was subdued. She avoided eye contact with friends and fellow parishioners, fearful that they could somehow see through her. The affair she had once convinced herself was a necessary escape now felt like a chain around her neck, but she couldn't bring herself to speak of it. Not to the detectives who had questioned her, or to Aaron, whose demeanor had grown more unpredictable by the day. As Christmas approached, the tension between the couple reached a breaking point. Aaron's paranoia was no longer just an internal struggle, it seeped into his interactions with Eleanor. He watched her constantly, searching for any sign that she might slip up and reveal what she knew. She, in turn, grew more distant, consumed by her own fears and regrets. Their home, once a symbol of stability and success, now felt like a battlefield. The police, despite their thorough investigation, were running out of leads. Tariq had no known enemies, and his life appeared to be free of the kind of complications that might lead to such a violent end. However, one piece of evidence had caught their attention: security camera footage from a nearby street that showed a car matching Aaron's leaving the area around the time of the murder. Detective Sarah Molina, who was leading the case, had her suspicions. Something about Eleanor's demeanor during their initial interview didn't sit right with her. She had seen that kind of nervousness before, not just as a reaction to grief, but as a sign of someone hiding something. And while Aaron's name hadn't come up in their investigation, his reputation as a no-nonsense judge made her curious about his reaction to the crime. Sarah decided to take a closer look at the Whitakers. She began digging into their lives, speaking to people who knew them both personally and professionally. What she found wasn't damning but intriguing. Accounts of a marriage that had grown cold over the years, whispers of Aaron's temper in court, and Eleanor's increasing involvement in church activities. It wasn't much, but it was enough to warrant a second interview. When Sarah and her partner arrived at the Whitaker home just days before Christmas, the tension inside the house was palpable. Aaron greeted them at the door, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Eleanor appeared moments later, her face pale and her hands trembling. The detectives asked to speak with them separately, a request that made Aaron's jaw tighten, though he reluctantly agreed. In the living room, Eleanor sat across from Sarah, her posture stiff and her eyes darting nervously around the room. Sarah began with routine questions, revisiting details from their previous conversation, but as the questions became more pointed, asking about her relationship with Tariq, her whereabouts the night of the murder, Eleanor's composure began to crack. Aaron, meanwhile, was being questioned in his study. His responses were measured, almost robotic, as though he were delivering a closing argument in court. He denied any involvement in Tariq's death, stating that he had been working late that night. But his avoidance of eye contact and the slight tremor in his voice didn't go unnoticed. The detectives left the house without making any accusations, but their visit left both Aaron and Eleanor on edge. That night, the tension between them erupted into an argument that revealed just how fragile their relationship had become. Eleanor accused Aaron of knowing more than he let on, while Aaron lashed out, accusing her of ruining their marriage with her. The next morning, Eleanor made a decision that would change everything. She went to the police station and confessed to her affair with Tariq. She didn't implicate Aaron directly, but mentioned that he had grown increasingly distant and angry in the weeks leading up to the murder. She hoped that by coming clean, she could relieve some of the guilt she carried and perhaps protect herself if Aaron's behavior escalated further. Sarah listened carefully to Eleanor's confession, taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions. While Eleanor's admission didn't prove Aaron's involvement, it added a new layer to the case. The motive was becoming clearer, and Sarah knew they were getting closer to the truth. On December 23, 2024, the police obtained a warrant to search the Whitaker home. Aaron was at work when they arrived, but Eleanor was present, watching nervously as officers combed through their belongings. In Aaron's study, they found the paperweight, its faint bloodstain still visible under forensic analysis. They also discovered a series of notes in Aaron's handwriting, detailing Tariq's schedule and movements. When Aaron returned home that evening, he was met by officers waiting to arrest him. His initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by a desperate attempt to assert his innocence. But the evidence was damning, and the once respected judge was taken into custody, his career and reputation in ruins. The trial that followed captivated the nation. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and rage, driven to murder by his wife's betrayal. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Aaron had been framed. Eleanor, testifying against her husband, described their fractured marriage and his growing instability in the weeks before Tariq's death. In the end, the jury found Aaron guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a fall from grace that left the San Francisco community reeling. Eleanor, though free from legal consequences, remained haunted by the events that had unfolded. She left the city shortly after the trial, seeking a fresh start, far from the memories of her shattered life. As for Tariq, his family and students continued to mourn his loss, remembering him as a bright light extinguished too soon. His death served as a chilling reminder of the devastating consequences of obsession, betrayal, and unchecked rage. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered Aaron Whitaker's sentencing. The once revered legal figure sat stoically, his face devoid of emotion, but his clenched fists betrayed his inner turmoil. The media had been relentless in their coverage, dubbing the case the judge's fall from grace. Cameras captured every detail, the sharp creases of his tailored suit, the deep lines etched into his face, and the distant, almost hollow look in his eyes. It was a public spectacle, the kind of scandal that tore apart lives and left legacies in ruins. The trial had been one of the most high-profile in San Francisco's recent history. Prosecutors methodically laid out their case, connecting Aaron's jealousy over his wife's affair to the brutal murder of Tariq Hadi. They presented forensic evidence linking Aaron to the crime scene, including the blood-stained paperweight found in his study, and GPS data placing him near Tariq's home on the night of the murder. Witnesses testified to Aaron's volatile temper, painting a picture of a man consumed by his need for control and vengeance. Eleanor's testimony had been particularly damning. Her appearance in court was harrowing, her once pristine composure shattered, her voice trembling as she recounted the unraveling of their marriage. She detailed how Aaron had grown increasingly erratic, his anger bubbling beneath the surface, culminating in moments of frightening intensity. When asked about her affair with Tariq, she openly admitted to it, her voice cracking with guilt and sorrow. She described the warmth and kindness Tariq had shown her, contrasting it with the coldness that had come to define her relationship with Aaron. But Eleanor's honesty came with its own burden. The courtroom was quick to judge her as well, branding her as the unfaithful wife who had set the tragic chain of events into motion. Public opinion was divided. Some sympathized with her, believing her to be a victim of Aaron's controlling nature, while others viewed her as equally culpable. The whispers and stares she endured during the trial were almost as suffocating as her own guilt. Aaron's defense team attempted to discredit the prosecution's narrative, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that Aaron had been unfairly targeted due to his prominence in the legal community. They suggested alternate theories, pointing fingers at Tariq's supposed unknown enemies or even a random act of violence, but their arguments were thin and the jury seemed unconvinced. The weight of the evidence and Aaron's own behavior was too much to ignore. On the day of his sentencing, the judge's words were as sharp as a knife. "Aaron Whitaker," she began, her tone measured but firm, "you held a position of power and trust in this community. You were tasked with upholding justice. Yet you allowed your own personal grievances to lead you down a path of violence and destruction. This court finds your actions to be reprehensible." Aaron was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder, a verdict that left the courtroom buzzing with murmurs. Eleanor sat in the gallery, her face pale and her hands trembling, as she watched the man she had once loved being led away in handcuffs. The image of Aaron, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped, was one she would never forget. The fallout from the case rippled far beyond the courtroom. Aaron's colleagues in the legal field distanced themselves from him, his name becoming synonymous with disgrace. His career was over, his reputation irreparably tarnished. The house he had once shared with Eleanor was sold, its walls holding too many painful memories for her to bear. Eleanor's life, too, was irrevocably changed. She left San Francisco shortly after the trial, seeking solace in a small town where no one knew her name or her past. She dedicated herself to volunteer work, hoping to find some measure of redemption in helping others. But the guilt lingered, a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the lives that had been destroyed. Reading. Tariq's family, meanwhile, struggled to come to terms with their loss. His parents, who had immigrated to the United States with dreams of a brighter future for their children, were left to mourn a son who had been full of promise. His students and colleagues at the school held a memorial in his honor, their tears a testament to the impact he had made in his short life. In the years that followed, the story of Aaron Whitaker and Tariq Hadi became the subject of books, podcasts, and documentaries. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, from Eleanor's affair to the forensic evidence that had sealed Aaron's fate. Debates raged over who was truly to blame, with some arguing that Aaron's actions were a tragic response to betrayal, while others condemned him as a cold-blooded killer. For those who had lived through it, however, the case was more than just a sensational story. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. It was a story of love, jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, loss. A story that left no winners, only victims. Aaron adjusted to life in prison with difficulty. His status as a former judge made him a target among the other inmates, and he spent much of his time in protective custody. The isolation weighed heavily on him, giving him ample time to reflect on the choices that had led him to this point. He wrote letters to Eleanor, though she never responded, and he spent hours poring over legal texts, perhaps seeking some semblance of the life he had lost. Eleanor, for her part, tried to rebuild her life. She found a sense of purpose in her volunteer work, but she never remarried, believing that she didn't deserve another chance at happiness. She kept a photograph of Tariq in a small box, along with a letter he had once written to her, his words a bittersweet reminder of the love they had shared. As for Tariq, his legacy lived on in the memories of those who had known him. His students spoke of the teacher who had inspired them to dream big, while his colleagues remembered him as a man of integrity and compassion. His death was a tragedy that left an indelible mark on everyone who had crossed his path. In the end, the story of Aaron, Eleanor, and Tariq, love, obsession, betrayal, and murder. How well do you really know the people closest to you? If you'd love more gripping true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and join us as we uncover the most chilling cases you've never heard of. Stay tuned.